Welcome into another episode of the Dog Check Podcast, part of the Believe Network of podcasts, and also airing on a television set across the great state of Northeast Ohio and all of Ohio. Near you, Spencer German with you, live from Acrisure Stadium. Kind of a shame that they changed the name of the stadium, by the way, because Heinz Field was awesome. And they had their own little gimmick with the ketchup bottles. It was perfect. But we're here, and we're ready to recap a Steelers win over the Browns as Cleveland mathematically today was officially eliminated from postseason contention. Not that we didn't already kind of see this coming for the Browns, but a couple of sort of big points here from the Cleveland angle, because I do think this game was interesting from the standpoint of it didn't feel like anybody, even though the score tells you the Steelers win by two scores, 27-14 the final. It didn't feel like the Steelers dominated this game. And when you kind of look at the stat sheet, that kind of bears itself out. Like Pittsburgh only threw for 147 yards. They had 147 yards passing. Browns had 196. Pittsburgh rushed for 120 yards. Browns rushed for 104 yards. There was turnovers on both sides, although the Browns had more. And that's kind of the big difference in this game, is that Pittsburgh had 3 turnovers, including 2 interceptions from Jameis Winston, which we'll talk about here in a second. And on the flip side, the Steelers just had the 1 fumble, and it almost became a turning point in the game that they gave the Browns a chance to get back into it. But that was right after that, Jameis throws his second pick of the game and basically kind of seals the Browns' fate at that point late in the fourth quarter, and that's where we get the final score, 27-14, and the Browns fall to 3-10 on the season, and pretty much at this point solely playing for draft positioning, and playoffs are obviously out of the equation. So. But yeah, like I didn't feel like either team really seized the moment, especially Pittsburgh, who obviously wins. But it was just kind of like a weird game in that way that Pittsburgh pulled away late, because they are a good team this year, and you kind of saw the difference between what makes a good team and what makes a bad team. Because the Browns had too many turnovers, they had too many penalties, they had 9 of them today. And the other big issue remains special teams errors in the form of 2 missed field goals from Dustin Hopkins, a muffed punt, which was one of the turnovers from Kadarius Toney, who might not even be on this roster by Monday morning, considering that he muffed a punt, got called for an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty because he threw the ball in the air and it hit a Steelers player when he was trying to throw it somewhere towards the sideline. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but he got called for it. It was 2 big errors and 2 things that obviously cost the Browns in a loss today to a Steelers team that is very much playoff bound, very much has everything they want in front of them, and is still jockeying for positioning potential in the AFC, as trying to earn maybe the 1 seed or even the 2 seed in terms of how matchups might play out. So I don't know. It was interesting from those angles, but I think you basically, in a game that was pretty close in terms of like the stats and all these different things, you saw the difference between a good team and a bad team today, and some of the errors that the Browns made that the Steelers just simply didn't. In that regard, I do want to start with Dustin Hopkins and the 2 missed field goals, because it's been an issue all year. Missing left has kind of been the trend for him. It's kind of a weird trend in that way. He missed one left today. First one he missed in the first quarter, or the first half rather. And then he comes out and in the second half misses to the right, because he admitted after the game that he overcompensated. Now there's legitimate, I guess, noise from the fan base about moving on from Dustin Hopkins. I don't see any way that happens, considering they just gave him a contract extension this offseason, and he still has the confidence of his teammates and coaches. Kevin Stefanski flat out said after the game, Dustin Hopkins, he's still our kicker. So I don't think they have any plans, and it kind of feels like in a season that has not gone the way anybody's planned, but with continued, it sounds like support, or at least like reporting that Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Perry aren't going to go anywhere, and this is going to kind of be a mulligan season for them. I think you can kind of lump Dustin Hopkins into that same group and say this is kind of a mulligan season for him. He's going to get a do-over. And it makes some sense. He had the best year of his career a season ago for the Browns, and for whatever reason, this year just hasn't been it, and the struggles continue to play themselves out on the field. But he remains here, and I will give him credit, because after the game, he stood there. He actually told the media, "Hey, I need 5 minutes, and then I'll address you guys." Like he was ready to embrace it. He wasn't going to run from it, and he stood there and took a bunch of questions just about his struggles this year, and owned up to it. So he deserves some credit for that. But obviously, I know fans want to see him make the kicks, and we'll see if he can turn it around before the end of the season, or if he just gets to wipe the slate clean next year, and there's just no simple way they can move on from him because of the dead cap money they would have to take on. Now, on the Jameis Winston front, it continues to be an ongoing conversation about whether or not he's kind of proven that he can be the bridge quarterback for this team moving forward. And when you use the word bridge, yes, I think Jameis certainly falls into that category. I think it makes sense to say he can be that guy for this team. But 24-41 today, 212 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. And the large point I want to make here is, like, for everybody to be all in on Jameis, I just find it kind of perplexing. And not perplexing, because I saw this with Joe Flacco last year. But I also saw this fan base quickly pivot after the playoff game last year and say that Joe Flacco, was the reason they lost that game because he threw the 2 interceptions, the 2 pick sixes, rather. Jameis has done similar stuff. He lost you a game on Monday night with the pick sixes. He threw another 2 interceptions today. And I continue to argue that, like, if these games mattered if this was a stretch of the season where the Browns were in the hunt per se, and they were fighting for a playoff spot, the 2 interceptions, the turnovers, his miscues would matter a lot more to this fan base than they do right now. So I'm not saying he shouldn't be the bridge quarterback. I'm not saying he shouldn't be back next year. I'm just saying, like, there's some gray area there in terms of, like, just resoundingly saying, like, bring Jameis back and let him be the guy. When, again, like, if your expectations next year are still going to be like, let's be competitive and see what we can do, there's going to be games that he costs you as much as there might be games that you can win. But I think the main point with Jameis remains that he gives you a chance. And coming from where this team was week 1 through 7, with a quarterback who clearly just doesn't have it anymore, and Deshaun Watson, it's refreshing, I know, for the fans and even us watching these games as media members who cover them. It's refreshing to see an offense that can actually do some things, a quarterback that can give you a chance to win games, and that's maybe the most important thing that comes out of all of this. So I think Jameis continues to sort of cement himself as a possibility to be back next year if he wants to. But it's just unfortunate that his miscues also are the reason that they're losing some of these games down the stretch. In a game, by the way, that, like, the Steelers or the Browns talked about it. Like, they really wanted to try to sweep the Steelers for the first time since 1988. Like, it's the little goals at this point. It's things like finishing with a winning record in the division, which they can still do, and maybe spoiling a season for somebody. And they didn't get a chance to do that today because there was just too many errors from a bad football team as a whole. Along those lines, just a couple other notes from today. Nick Chubb, I thought, looked a little bit better. He continues to look a little bit better each week. And I think there's something there on top of the fact that he does, I think, just need a full year. I think some of us maybe overestimated how quickly he could come back to being a solid to good or even great player. I think next year we might be talking about a guy who starts to look more like the Nick Chubb we know, if he can get as close as he can get to that. But I think this year was just too tall of a task to ask for that coming off of the injury that he suffered, and it's going to take some time. But he did look better today. Myles Garrett was sort of throwing a bunch of different things from Pittsburgh this week. Only had the 1 sack late in the game. He's only a half sack short of 100 for his career. So that's an encouraging thing, an exciting thing for him. But he didn't show up on the stat sheet too much, but it was because the Steelers had a good game plan for him. And also, guys, Jerry Jeudy continues to thrive for this Browns team. And as we ask about Jameis Winston's future with this team, I think it's also important to talk about Jerry as that number 1 wide receiver moving forward for this team, because he's looked great the last couple of weeks with Jameis Winston under center. He's been phenomenal. I think he showed you some things today as well that certainly hint to that. He had 5 catches for 64 yards and the 1 long touchdown, the 35-yard touchdown pass in the first quarter, which was felt like a turning point at the moment to sort of get some momentum on the Browns side and just never kind of came to fruition. But I think it's also telling that Jerry kind of mentioned after the game, the Steelers played them differently today defensively. They're generally a 1 high safety team, and they did the cover 2 safety look today and try to kind of limit the damage from Jerry Jeudy. I think that's a sign of just respect for a player who's been playing really, really well these last few weeks, and obviously on Monday night last week went absolutely bonkers with the 200+ yard game and scoring the touchdown and all that. So yeah, listen, guys, this Browns team, obviously not the season that anybody hoped for, and you were hoping to see them do some things tonight against the Steelers, or today rather, against the Steelers, and maybe give you like the one feather in the cap for the season, which would have been, hey, you sweep Pittsburgh and you got sort of this monkey off your back and you win there for the first time since 2003. it didn't happen. And so now you turn your attention to the Ravens. You turn your attention to the Bengals to try to finish with that above 500 record or a winning record in the division. We'll see if they can pull that off. And the Steelers, meanwhile, kind of trudge along. It's going to be interesting for Pittsburgh the rest of the way because Pittsburgh has a very, very tough schedule from here. I think they play the Eagles, then the Ravens going into Christmas. Christmas Day, we know they play the Chiefs. And then they finish off the season, I want to say, who do they finish? I forget who they finished the season with. But again, it's sort of a gauntlet of a schedule, which we had talked about with this Steelers team when the schedule was first released. And so for them, as the leaders in this division, a chance to sort of prove yourself and a chance to maybe earn that 1 seed. And unfortunately for the Browns, they couldn't kind of get in the way or interrupt that today enough to maybe derail some things or some of the goals that the Steelers might have. Acrisure Stadium continues to be a house of horrors for the Browns. They come up short today, 27-14 to Pittsburgh, and are heading on home at 3-10. Again, playing for ping pong balls at this point more so than anything else. That's going to do it for our post-game reaction show. I will be back, as always, with Eric Metcalf for our weekly edition of the show. We'll reflect on this game, look ahead to what's next, and maybe even talk a little bit about the offseason now that the playoffs are officially out of the equation for the Browns. As always, I want to thank you guys for being part of the Dog Check community, tuning in to the Dog Check podcast each and every single week. We are part of the Believe Network of podcasts and also air weekly on a television set near you across the great state of Ohio. Signing off from Acrisure Stadium, I'm Spencer German. Take it easy, guys, and we'll catch up later this week.